On this edition of the Newsmakers, moving forward with Brexit. 4 months after the UK voted to leave Europe, are we any closer to knowing what the divorce might look like? Also on today's program, confusion in Calais as French authorities push ahead with their plan to dismantle the so-called jungle refugee camp. And in Picture This, painting for peace after 3 years of civil war. South Sudanese artists come together to make their mark on Juba. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Andrea Sankey. Now, ever since the UK voted to leave the European Union back in June, the big question has been what shape the deal will take. Will the UK go for a complete and final divorce, or will it pursue more of a separation, with some parts of its relationship with the EU, such as the single market, remaining intact? Now, 4 months later, UK Prime Minister Theresa May appears to be pushing for a complete break, a so-called hard Brexit. And she's keen to get on with it, announcing that she'll trigger Article 50 by early next year. But her comments have also ushered in a new round of uncertainty that sent the pound plummeting to record lows. And it's meant the Brexit decision is finally hitting Brits where it really hurts, in their pockets. Our newsmaker today is Brexit, as we ask how it might proceed and what the choice means for the country.
4 months after the UK voted to leave the European Union, the fallout from Brexit is starting to bite. And it involves the country's love affair with Marmite. British supermarket Tesco pulled a range of products, including Marmite, from its online store after a row over pricing. Unilever, one of the major food suppliers, wanted to raise prices by 10% to offset the falling value of the pound. The Marmite pricing dispute has been settled, and the British staple is back on supermarket shelves. But the pressure of rising prices hasn't gone away. The pound has fallen around 15% against the dollar and the euro since the Brexit vote. That's given a big boost to exporters. And it's made the UK a cheaper destination for foreign tourists. But many economists warn that the currency dive will bring more harm than good in a country that imports more than half of its food and nearly half of its energy.
We will invoke Article 50 no later than the end of March next year.
It was these comments by Prime Minister Theresa May last month that sent the pound plunging. The signal that she will start the formal process of leaving the EU, and in doing so, start the clock on a 2-year countdown to finalize a Brexit deal. But there's still no clarity on what the deal will actually look like. A so-called hard Brexit would likely involve pulling out of the single market and ending free movement of people from Europe, a key demand for those who campaign to leave the EU. Or there could be a so-called soft Brexit, in which many of the existing relationships between the UK and the EU are preserved, especially economic and trade ties. But the EU would most likely demand free movement of people in return, an issue the Prime Minister has indicated is not up for discussion.
Yes, the United Kingdom will be a fully independent sovereign country, free to make our own decisions on a whole host of different issues, such as how we choose to control immigration. But we still want to trade freely in goods and services with Europe.
The Prime Minister's position appears to be hardening. And so is the position of European leaders.
Moi, je l'ai dit très fermement. Madame Theresa May veut un Brexit dur. La négociation sera dure.
And while Theresa May has a fight on her hands in Brussels, another battle is emerging back home, in the courts. Judges are expected to rule by December whether it's even legal for the government to trigger Article 50 without a vote by Parliament. And if Parliament does get to vote, the question won't be over a hard or soft Brexit, but it will revert to the question of whether Brexit should happen at all. Christine Pirovolakis, The Newsmakers.
Joining me now from London is Alan Craig. He is a Brexit activist and a member of the UK Independence Party, or UKIP. And from Strasbourg, I'm joined by Jean Lambert. She's a member of the European Parliament representing London for the Green Party. Thanks both so much for joining us. We've heard that soundbite of Prime Minister Theresa May 100 times saying Brexit means Brexit. It's in everyone's head. But as that report just pointed out, it's actually now up to the court to decide if Brexit can legally move forward without a parliamentary vote, as the referendum was actually non-binding. Alan Craig, what will happen if the court rules against Brexit without a parliamentary vote?
Well, we'll have to see. I mean, the legal process takes its toll, it takes its time, and we'll have to see. I think at the end of the day, though, the legal process and the parliamentary process, and of course Parliament has to be involved in it, neither of those are in a position to reverse or stop the decision of the British people on the 23rd of June. It was a clear message: we want to come out of the EU. Full stop. That means out of all the structures, out of all the agreements, out of everything else that ties us within there. We want our country back. And that was the decision. The British people were asked, and the British people spoke. It couldn't be clearer. So we'll have to wait and see. I mean, there's all this hard Brexit, soft Brexit, Brexit light and slower going on. It's all just posturing and guessing. We really don't know at the moment. The negotiation hasn't started, and I wait to see what happens during the negotiations.
Okay, Jean Lambert, do you think it's the court's duty to, in a sense, prevent this referendum, non-binding referendum, from being implemented?
Well, I think that what the court is trying to do is not say whether or not it should be implemented. It's saying, you know, what are the bodies that should be engaged in this, and whether a referendum, if you know, as you've pointed out, it's non-binding, but nevertheless, government is very clear it's accepted the results. Whether it can be simply left to the Prime Minister and her cabinet to even decide what it is we're trying to put on the table, and therefore the role of Parliament in this is absolutely crucial. And I think that those who would argue that they want to leave the European Union to so-called take back control didn't mean that they were simply going to hand it over to Theresa May. It's about the Parliament being engaged in looking at what is it we're putting on the table, what's the process of the deal, and at the end of the day, is that deal good enough?
Ellen, go ahead if you had a comment. If not, I wanted to point out that...
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. We elect Parliament, and Parliament has a job to do. Parliament must be involved in some way. I mean, Parliament's involved in keeping the government to account. Parliament's involved in passing legislation that the government wants passed, and so on. So I don't think we'd want to bypass Parliament. That would be a sort of denial of the sort of representative democracy we have. My only caveat on that is clearly a majority of the MPs are Remainers and want to stay in. I wouldn't give them the right, or there'd be flaming rows if at the end of the day Parliament said, well, actually, we're going to reverse the decision of the British people and we're going to stay in. But barring that sort of extreme and, I have to say, unexpected decision by Parliament, if they say, OK, well, the British people have spoken, now we want to have our say as representatives of the British people, well, I would acknowledge that's the role of Parliament, and that's what the MPs should do. If they're positive about it and so on, they need to be involved.
OK, Ellen, do you accept, though, some argue that while, yes, over 17 million said let's leave the EU, over 16 million said let's stay, and of those that said leave, many of them came out later and said that they were actually confused, that they felt a bit misled. And I personally have heard a number of voters say they'd actually like to do it again. But also you have Scotland and Northern Ireland and Londoners as well in the picture that have a huge majority voting to stay. So is it fair for you to say that there is such a clear vote in favor of Brexit?
I think it's this thing about people have changed their mind. People change their mind about all sorts of things. People have changed their mind other way. People who weren't very sure about it, but were just persuaded by David Cameron they ought to go to Remain, now think, actually, yes, having our own independence back, having our own Parliament, deciding our laws for us instead of being decided in Parliament, is a good idea. We're back to being a normal nation again. You know, it's no longer just a province of a sort of greater Europe. We're back to being a normal nation. So these things cut both ways, and I don't think that's the issue. I think... the government, I quite like what Theresa May is saying. She's speaking quite bluntly and quite straightforwardly, and quite rightly is saying, look, I'm not going to disclose my hands ahead of the negotiations. Why should we? And indeed, why should the government? I wouldn't expect the government to do so.
OK.
I think the other thing is the British, well, your last point, you asked about Scotland and Wales and so on. The British people in toto were asked, and the British people in toto spoke. Of course, we'd expect Nicola Sturgeon to ride upon it and try and... she wants to have a second referendum, and now she's found another reason for wanting it. But it was always going to happen, and whatever happened, as long as she was First Minister in Scotland. But she's just playing her game. There's a lot of bravado from her and so on. But
Ellen,
let her get on with it. We'll get on with the negotiations.
I'd like to get back to the Scotland, Northern Ireland, London issue in a minute. But first, let me ask Jean, you know, if the court does rule that the Brexit needs to go forward as the government in power now sees fit, should the UK pursue which strategy here, the hard Brexit option or the soft Brexit option?
I mean, I think that there is a range of options on the table, and that therefore the government does need to actually have an idea which direction it's going in. You don't shut the door until you've decided what your destination is. And this idea about you're putting forward all the nuts and bolts of what it is you're prepared to negotiate, I think is actually a sideshow. You do need to have a clear idea what it is you're trying to get. What are the goals? Do you want to stay within a single market? Do you actually want to have real access to that? Do you want to be prepared to keep some of the really good stuff, the strong environmental legislation, the quality standards? The City of London will tell you it wants to keep its passporting rights to be part of the whole sort of financial system within the European Union. And that's the sort of thing that the government now has to make up its mind on, and with some priorities within that, whether they think actually access to that market is so important to us and so important to jobs and the well-being of the United Kingdom. They want to put that against, you know, a set of trade deals where frankly they don't even know yet what the trade deal will be with the European Union. They can't start properly negotiating with other countries until after that agreement with the European Union is done.
Alan, you can go ahead now.
Yeah, sure. Yes and no. The government does not have the right to keep us in the single market. It's absolutely clear. Britain voted, the overwhelming majority of Britain said out. Clear, leave, out, gone. So, but however, you are right in saying, of course, the government needs to listen to people, listen to the city, listen to people in Scotland and so on, take on board their interests, farmers, fishermen and so on, take it on when it's developing that strategy. Now, Theresa May has said quite rightly, this hard Brexit, soft Brexit business is not very helpful because it's not a sort of black or white thing. It will have, within the basis of Britain coming out of the European Union, it will want to try and negotiate good deals and so on as it can, but it won't want to, and I would expect it not to disclose its hand as it goes into the negotiation. That's really rather silly, and I think Theresa May's made that point. I'm not a Conservative, but I have to say I've been pretty impressed by her so far if she does what she says. And I think she's got to play her cards close to the chest. She has to listen to everybody, listen to the Scots, listen to the Welsh, listen to the City of London, listen to everybody, listen to the fishing industry and so on. And then actually the government has to go ahead and carry out the will of the British people as best it can, negotiating the best thing. And staying in the single market is simply not one of those options. It's like saying stay in the EU. We can't. We're on the way out. Okay,
Jean, we have time for a final response from you. And if you could also address the issue with Scotland and Northern Ireland, particularly Scotland calling for another referendum to secede from the Union of the UK.
Well, firstly, let's be clear, this is not an overwhelming majority. In most places, you can't change the constitution of your darts club on something which is not a qualified majority. But in terms of what it means for Scotland, for Northern Ireland, the issue about that border, for example, between the north and south of Ireland is really important in terms of not only the economic future of those two parts of the island, but also the ongoing peace process. And people from both sides will be telling you that. For Scotland, they will say to you that they took the decision to remain within the United Kingdom on the basis of also being told that was the way to stay in the European Union. There is now a real material change there. I don't think it's at all surprising that they are considering a second referendum if they feel that they've effectively been shortchanged on the results of the first. It wouldn't be surprising at all and quite understandable.
Okay, Alan, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to give Jean the last word. I'd like to thank both Jean Lambert and Alan Craig so much for joining us on this edition of the Newsmakers. Still to come on the Newsmakers, French authorities are determined to demolish the so-called jungle refugee camp in Calais as its thousands of residents wait to find out where they'll be sent. And in Picture This, how artists from South Sudan are coming together to call for peace in their country. Well, it seems that time has finally run out for the residents of the Calais camp that has come to be known as the jungle. Thousands of refugees and migrants have been lining up to be transferred to other locations in France before the bulldozers get to work on demolishing the site entirely. But the resettlement process has been haphazard, and thousands of jungle residents, including many unaccompanied children, are still waiting to find out where they're going next. Sarah Morris has this report from Calais.
It's the beginning of the end for the jungle. Refugees and migrants queue to leave the camp, taking with them their few possessions and a mix of relief, hope and shattered dreams.
Now I think that I will start a new life, because in the jungle there is no life. It's not life.
We wasn't happy because we got no bright future. We know this very well.
They destroy everything tomorrow. They will destroy everything tomorrow. What will we do after tomorrow?
The jungle has been home to more than 7,000 refugees. They're now being dispersed among processing centres across France, where they'll be given the chance to apply for asylum or face deportation. These tents and ramshackle huts make up the so-called Calais jungle that thousands of people have been calling home. But no more. Over the next couple of days, authorities will tear all these structures down. Most people are resigned to the fact they have to leave, but some have told us they'll be trying to make their way back here within weeks. So far, the evacuation has been peaceful, despite scenes of violence on Sunday evening. Police fired tear gas and clashes broke out the night before the eviction began. Many here are still holding on to the dream of going to the UK. It's estimated around 2,000 people will refuse to leave the camp, and there's concern the situation could turn violent. 1,200 police are on site, ready to respond.
What worries us all is the presence of activists who are out to convince the more rebellious migrants to stay in the jungle and join the movement and protest by committing acts of violence.
France and the UK have made it clear even if they don't leave quietly, these migrants will be leaving.
Calais has no future. It's better for the migrants not to stay in the mud and begin the official asylum-seeking process so they can integrate into French life.
Neither government is prepared to allow people to continue to live in those conditions. We will continue to support the French government in the operation and will continue with our progress in bringing those children with a right to come to the UK as quickly and as safely as possible.
Around 1,300 unaccompanied children are in the camp. The UK has agreed to take all those with family ties there and says it may look at accepting even more. As the dismantling of this sprawling shantytown begins, some of its residents are preparing to dig their heels in. But for others, it's a time to rejoice and look ahead to a new life after the jungle. Sarah Morris, The Newsmakers, Calais.
Well, joining me now from Calais is François Guénoc. He is from the local aid group Auberge des Migrants, which has been working with residents of the jungle camp. François, thanks so much for joining us. First, give us your perspective on what's happening in Calais today. Is closing the camp in the interest of its residents?
You know, for the moment, the situation is quiet because so many people wanted to leave this bad place to go to the CAO, Centre d'accueil et d'orientation. People who have begun to ask to apply for asylum or to want to do. But now, and probably tomorrow, in the camp, people staying there are generally people who don't want to go to the CAO because they are afraid. For example, they are afraid to be evicted to Italy or Greece if they have their fingerprints in this country, and people who go on to try to cross the channel.
But is it better for them, the option of going into these official camps in France, because unlike the jungle in Calais, they will now be under international supervision. They're no longer in an illegal squatter camp where they fall outside the supervision of the United Nations, for example. Isn't that a better option for them?
Yes, but you know, these camps don't exist in France. You know, in France, you had so many people on this jungle, on this camp, because the people who want to go to Great Britain were there, but also people who cannot find any place in France just to rest and just to have a tent or one meal a day. And you have also many people staying there because it's the only place where people are allowed to go to the CAO. So about people who don't want to leave this camp, or at the end they will be pushed off by the police. Probably they are going to try to stay, to hide here, or to go, for example, to Paris and come back, and their situation will be better than their actual situation.
Let me ask you, Francois, for those who are not fleeing war, and for those whose lives were not in danger in their home countries, is being deported back to their home countries actually a bad option at this point?
You know, in this camp, about 90% of people come from countries in war, like Syria, or dictators like Eritrea, or war also from Sudan, and so on. And probably they can apply for asylum and be protected by France. Only 10 to 15% here are here for economic reasons. These people probably try to go to Great Britain because it's easier for them to live in Great Britain. They speak English, they can find a job, and they have family and friends in Great Britain. But if they don't succeed to cross the Channel, yes, probably they could be arrested and evicted to their country. I can add that the French government proposed a plane ticket and some money to get back to their country, but few people want to get back to their country because of war, because of dictator.
Now, we heard from the officer in that report that we just saw, the police officer, that some of the residents in the jungle camp are actually being encouraged by activists, some with various NGOs, to commit acts of violence against police in order to remain in Calais. Is that the case? Have you seen that as well?
Yes, you know, since 2 weeks, 1 week, new people arrive here in the jungle, European people. Probably they are activists. They are not 200, like the government say 200. We think there are maybe 30 or 40 people. We don't know if they are far left people or far right people. Probably there are also far right people. For the moment, their only action is to try to block the journalists when they want to do that job on the camp, and they try to incite the migrants to do the same thing. But for the moment, there is no violence. But we don't know if in next days violence is not going to occur. We don't know for the moment the aim of their presence here.
Francois, then, do you think the French government is doing its best to manage this situation? Or if you had control, would you manage this process completely differently? No. You know, the CAO, the Center to Welcome People, are a good thing for people wanting to stay in France. For other people, this is not a solution, and we have a problem mainly about people underage, unaccompanied minors. You know, you have said that Great Britain is okay to take these people, to take more maybe than young people having a family in Great Britain, but for the largest part of these young people, the French government has no solution for the moment. For the moment, they are sheltered in the CAP, in the containers, but we think that the government has not real project for them. That's the main problem today, probably. Okay, Francois Guénoc, we will leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us on the Newsmakers. In today's Picture This, a group of South Sudanese artists have come together to call for an end to the violence in their country. Let's take a look at their paintings for peace. You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Andrea Sankey. Thanks for joining us. Goodbye.